Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. My name is Evan McCauley, president of the club, and we are thrilled to have you joining us today. This meeting broadcast is available on HCTV as well as our Rotary of Hudson YouTube channel. Our club meets weekly at Laurel Lake for breakfast on Wednesday mornings from 7:15 to 8:30 a.m. Come out and join us for a meeting. We'd love to have you as a guest. To learn more about Rotary, our club, and the impact that we are having on the local community and world, please visit rotaryhudson.org. Enjoy the meeting today and be the inspiration.
Good morning, Rotarians and guests. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. I'm Ron Strobel, the Sergeant at Arms. Our invocation this morning is by Bill Wooldridge, I believe. What?
Switching it up. He's eating his bacon. We didn't have anything. There's twice here.
She will attest that I ate some bacon. Well, good morning, Rotarians.
Good morning, Bill.
Dear Heavenly Father, let us pray. We ask your blessing on this breakfast we're eating, that it might nourish our bodies to serve in your name. In this time when our country is so deeply divided and contentious, we ask you to help us to listen and understand each other. Help us to heal our wounds and come together for this city and country that we love. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bill. And to lead us in the pledge and the four-way test, Bill Benoit.
Morning. All right, flags over this way. Ready for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the four-way test. First, is the truth. Second, is it fair to all concerned. Third, will build goodwill and better friendships. Fourth, will be beneficial to all concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And we don't have a Bill to lead us in song, so Chris Barker.
Good morning, Rotarians and guests.
Good morning.
So we're going to sing something patriotic today. We're going to sing My Country 'Tis of Thee. If you please join me. My country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Now our president, Evan McCauley.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Chris. Good morning, fellow Rotarians. Good morning, community members, and good morning, guests. We have an excellent presentation this morning. Thank you to Mike and Casey for being with us this morning. Just a couple of club announcements, kicked off with Marilyn Orr.
Julia has a birthday on November 7th. November 9th is her birthday. She'll be 18 on that day. She is on a personal quest to find the best hamburger in Northeast Ohio. Right now, the ranking is Blue Door for the breakfast burger, and in position number 6, Wendy's. So anyway, she's very active, and we're collecting things for her birthday. She likes her t-shirt large, so if you're wanting to get something, extra large would be what we were going for. But anyway, thank you very much, and we'll be collecting next week. Now remember, she will be here next week, so this will require a bit of stealth. And my cohort in crime, Chris Barker, will be collecting at the front desk as you come in. So next week, and next week only, we'll be collecting for Leah's birthday. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Marilyn. Let's fill up that birthday basket for Leah. Backtracking just momentarily to welcome our guests this morning, Joe Woldridge. Thanks for being with us. It's always great to see you. In lieu of all the jokes, we love having you here, and we love Bill, always. Also, you see some fresh faces in the back with green jackets, and that's our Interact Club officers. So thank you for being here this morning. We've got John, Dahlia, Daniel, Nadia, Elizabeth, and Wanda, who's the Interact chair, sitting back there with Allison.
And we have one.
Nate. I'm sorry, I forgot you, Nate. You gave me everyone's names. Well, thank you for being here. Hope you enjoy the breakfast and the presentation today. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. Y'all don't want to hear me talk. You want to hear these young politicians share with us what they're going to be doing. So Mayor Dave Basil is going to go ahead and get things kicked off for us.
Thank you, Evan. Good morning, fellow Rotarians and guests.
Good morning.
It is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. We have candidates today for the Ohio House of Representatives, 37th District. Mike Razor, the Republican candidate, attended Stowe Monroe High School and received his bachelor's degree and law degree from the University of Akron. While at Akron Law School, he was editor-in-chief of the Akron Law Review. He is a partner in the Cleveland, Ohio law firm of Kavich, Familo, and Durkin, and has served on Stowe City Council for almost 9 years. Mike and his wife Laura reside in Stowe with their 1-year-old daughter, Selah. Casey Weinstein, the Democratic candidate, is a 2004 graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy and received his MBA in 2007 from Ohio State University's Fisher College of Business. He is currently a managing client director for Gartner and is a member of the Leadership Hudson class of 2014. Casey has served on Hudson City Council since 2015 and resides in Hudson with his wife Amanda, an assistant professor of economics at Akron University, and daughters Nora and Amelia. Please join me in giving a warm Rotary welcome to our speakers today. And gentlemen, preference on who goes first? Flip a coin? Okay. Okay.
Okay.
6
minutes total.
6 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. This qualifies as the earliest speech I've had to give in the campaign trail, but I'm thrilled to be here. I've gotten to the point where I just like to talk extemporaneously, somewhat like the president, but not like the president. Don't worry. Let me just tell you a little bit about my background. I was born and raised in Northeast Ohio, in Stowe and Monroe Falls, as a matter of fact, and I truly, truly care about this area and this region. So a lot of what you see in politics, you see the divisiveness of left versus right, Republican versus Democrat. There's a lot of ways that we can fight for our region and for our county, so I'm going to do that. And that's really where my political experience began. I was a 24-year-old at the University of Akron's law school. I'm just elected as the editor-in-chief of the Law Review, which is really the biggest job you can have as a law student. But at that time, I recognized that my hometown of Stowe had some very, very troubling problems financially. And I always thought, like, you know, maybe when I'm 50 or 60, I want to run for city council, like Bill. Bill seems to be the punching bag, so. But I never really thought, like, politics was in the cards for me. I wanted to practice law and do good in that way. But I recognized that at age 24 there was no time to wait because my city was had the following problems. We had $31 million of city debt. We had a $1 million budget deficit each of the previous few years, and we only had $2 million left in the bank. So you can only do that for 2 more years of running a $1 million deficit before you're out of money. You've got to start raising taxes on people, or you have to start cutting services. So to me, as somebody, as a person who was born and raised in and felt a deep connection to the community. I felt like I had to do something about it. So as a 24-year-old, I ran for city council. And I ran and I won. I beat a guy who'd been there for 14 years, a former law professor. And to this day, I don't know why people voted for me over that guy, but they did, and I'm happy they did. And maybe it's prophetic that they did, because let me tell you where we've been since then in the city of Stowe. I told you that we had $31 million of city debt when I was first elected. We now have $15 million of city debt. I told you that we had a $1 million budget hole. Last year we had a $319,000 budget surplus. I told you we only had $2 million left in the bank. We now have $5 million left in the bank. So we did all these things. You may be surprised. You say, well, Mike, what'd you do? You must have slashed services, closed some parks, raised people's taxes. No, we did none of that. And that's what I'm most proud of, is we did it by making government efficient and just using our brains. You'd be surprised at the low threshold you have in government just to excel beyond the rest. And that's what we did. But it took a lot of effort. It took a lot of meetings where I was getting yelled at by people, where they'd fill the room up with folks, a lot of times city employees, and said, well, we are entitled to these raises. And I said, we just can't afford them. And that's how a business would operate. And that's how I want to operate the state of Ohio. So that's the first thing I want to do as a state legislator, is I want to run with fiscal responsibility so that we're treating your taxpayer dollars with respect. The second thing is something you're probably not going to hear from many politicians on the Democrat or Republican side, is I want to do a full court press to tackle generational poverty. We all know of neighborhoods, or can think of families, that have been poor for decades and decades, and the generation before them was poor, and before them was poor. And to maybe to them, all they know really is that the government's going to sustain them. That's not, in my opinion, that's not how God created us to live. I believe that we were put on this planet to have a purpose and to work. And sometimes that work is in the home, sometimes that work is in a vocation. And I don't think the state of Ohio, or this country for that matter, has taken generational poverty seriously enough, or treated it as the severe problem that it is. So I have a lot of great ideas of how to do that. But I also want to talk to you guys a little bit today about what I think is holding our country and our state back from achieving what it can as the greatest country in the world, and to me, the greatest state in the greatest country of the world. First, we don't elect politicians who have a lick of sense when it comes to negotiating. And why is that valuable? Why is that important? Because we have to be truthful with ourselves to say, I'm a Republican, to say as a Republican, we're never going to have undivided government where we can just ram things through. We have the Republicans have the House, the Senate, and the White House in Washington, and they still can't get barely anything done. And that's as good as it's going to get. So what should that tell you? It should tell you that the art of negotiation is incredibly important. And you need to elect people who know how to work together with the other side and take 80 and 70% deals like Ronald Reagan always preached. The second thing I think that's wrong with our government is that we elect people who don't root for the success of the country. It seems so basic, but people, Democrats don't root for the party. A lot of Democrats don't root for the party in power to succeed. And the same was true under Obama. A lot of Republicans didn't root for the country to succeed. Well, let me tell you that when the country and the state succeed, more families have food to put on the table. And more businesses are hiring, and growth is happening, and people are happier and have a better quality of life. So we need to start electing people who actually care about the people and not about winning elections only. So I'm running out of time. I really appreciate the Rotary for inviting me, and Hudson's been super good to me. I've now visited every street except for a few which my wife visited, and the reception's been great, and I'm very thankful. Thank you.
And now, Mr. Weinstein.
As Mike alluded, 2003, when I was working out and then needed to move, I was moving to the other side of the gym, so I had to adjust a TV, big old cathode ray TV on the wall that was on a pedestal, and I went to move it, and it broke off, and it fell on me. And so I was kind of like stuck atlasing it a little bit, but not very well. And so I kind of like cried out for help, and the only other cadet in the entire gym that summer morning was the former Amanda Baronic. She came over, rescued me from the TV, locked in the power dynamic for our relationship right then and there. And we ended up dating and getting married, and she ended up getting assigned to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I had been assigned out of the Academy to Los Angeles Air Force Base. So when you get married, the Air Force does a good job of moving you together. So they brought me to join her at Wright-Pat. That's what brought us to Ohio. And when we finished our graduate work at Ohio State, she got hired on to the University of Akron, where, as the mayor mentioned, she teaches today in the economics department. And my day job is as a managing client director for Gartner. I work from home, so I joined her up here, and folks said, check out Hudson, and I'm so glad we did. We've had a tremendous 5 years here and quickly decided that we wanted to stay here permanently. I was looking to continue my service in some way, was sort of missing the uniform, and was looking for a program to be involved with. And my real estate agent actually was a graduate of Leadership Hudson, and she recommended I get in the program, and they made an exception for me. I got in after the deadline, and like on my 10th day living in Hudson, I started the Leadership Hudson program, and I'm so glad I did that. What I learned through that program was the great people in the city, the great organizations that we have, the very well-run government, and the different groups that can come together to do big things. We have an incredible history. We have incredible people and committed volunteers and committed citizens. We hear from them often on Tuesday nights, I can tell you that. And they have this passion for the city, which is tremendous. And so I came in with a head of steam and said, well, let's put solar power on our community center here in Barlow. And, not really knowing the community, I just said, okay, and folks sort of ignored me for 6 months in the class, but I just kept coming back with more and more information, and finally people in the class said, yeah, okay, we can do this. And it was greeted with certainly some skepticism, but we came together in that program, and we came together as a class, and the community really came together. And on a $50,000 goal, we raised $72,000, and we ran out of roof space at Barlow Community Center, so that's why we have that ground array there now. And I'm really, really proud of that project, and that inspired me to run for council. And I'm really proud of what I've done on city council, and it's been an incredible proving ground for me. As the Democrat, I'm kind of proud to say I'm the Democrat on Hudson City Council, but that has absolutely caused me to mold myself as a politician, as a public servant, I should say, in a bipartisan way. To get anything done on City Council, I work across the aisle with some incredible people, some of whom are here in the room. And we've done some great things, and sometimes those things don't get talked about, but our AAA+++ bond rating has actually strengthened over the last few years. We have filled up Hudson Crossing, which sat mostly vacant for 20 years and is now almost fully subscribed, with millions of dollars of payroll coming with it. We've established a new municipal services center, saving $4 million from the option of building our own. We've been able to provide more funds for the roads. We've been able to create and expand velocity broadband for businesses, which has been a really valuable economic development tool. We are the only American city to be named a global top 21 smart city, which is really incredible. The only city in America. What does that mean to me? It comes back to a walk. My wife put on a Jane's Walk, which is sort of a walk of the history and the future of Hudson, that was actually hosted by Lori Williams. And she took us through sort of downtown Hudson, from the historic district down through First and Main. And it was a really interesting evolution that we saw. One story that really stood out for me, was the story of James Ellsworth, who, as I think most of us know in this room, came back in 1907 to Hudson and saw a community on the decline and realized that we needed to invest in the community, and made those investments in sewers, in roads, in tree planting, in building the infrastructure from which Hudson was able to grow and take off. I hope to continue in that tradition as your state representative and make the investments that we need for strong communities, for Hudson, for Stowe, and every city across this district and region. To do that, we need funds from the state. The rainy day fund is at its legal maximum, near its legal maximum. The question now is what to do with the funding. Do we give it back in more tax cuts, or do we restore it to the cities who so really need it to build that strong foundation that the visionary James Ellsworth saw? So I hope you'll give me an opportunity to go represent this city at the next level, bring that ability for us to do the things that we want to do for the next generation of Hudsonites. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now I'll ask each of you, both of you, to come up. And this will be an opportunity for members and guests to ask the candidates questions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer a question, and we'll just kind of step in and out of this microphone because we can use then 2 microphones for the questions. So gentlemen, first question.
And I'd ask everybody to use the microphone because we are being recorded and they can't hear you if you're not using the microphone.
I would just ask either of you or both of you about how you would address the opioid crisis. What your thoughts are on how to handle that.
Yes, thank you very much. That definitely comes up a lot. Probably the greatest short-term challenge, hopefully short-term challenge that we have in the state. There's a couple specific policy initiatives that I want to pursue at the State House if given the opportunity. One is restoration of local government funding, which I alluded to in my introduction. But those funds go to vital city and county services at the city level to first responders, who are the folks carrying the Narcan, the tip of the spear, who, you know, we see the data at the city level and I see the data at the county level. A greater percentage of their calls, an ever greater percentage, are focused on opioid or overdose responses. We need to make sure they have the funding to respond. But on the front end, on stemming the demand and getting at the core of the problem, we need to ensure that the Medicaid expansion that Governor Kasich rolled out in the state is maintained. It's been rated fiscally sustainable, but I think even more importantly, it's the moral and it is economically the right thing to do. When it comes to giving access to care for people, nothing is more important in terms of a policy initiative than maintaining the Medicaid expansion. Where states have not expanded Medicaid or kept the Medicaid expansion, 1 out of 4 rural hospitals have closed. That would be devastating for our state at some of the hot spots of where the problem is. So I would be a strong proponent of that, and that is very much an open question in the next legislature whether that will continue. On the economic side, there's a massive economic reason because of the strength of that industry that is tied to that. So restoration of local government funding also goes to county services that can target using data from the pharmacy group in Ohio has a database that looks at where folks are getting prescriptions from. County services can hone in and target those folks and try and get ahead of the problem as well. Those funds are relying on local government funding as well, or those programs.
Thanks for that question. It's a question we get a lot. I want to attack the opioid crisis the same way you would destroy any economic market. You go after supply and you go after demand. As far as supply goes, I see fentanyl and carfentanil as not drugs but weapons of mass destruction. And if somebody is going to be sneaking those drugs into somebody's heroin, I see it no different than if I were sitting at dinner across from Evan and I sneak rat poison into his beer. It's attempted murder or it's murder. And the criminal punishments should mirror that. For that reason, issue 1 is one of the dumbest ideas you could ever put on before the voters for the Constitution. As far as demand goes, I have a deep moral obligation and feeling that we can't leave anybody behind. We have to give everybody absolutely as many treatment opportunities as we can, and we have to have a great deal of compassion for people who are trapped in this mess, because it's not just a recreation, it is a trap. Through being a city councilman in Stowe, I've become friends with a woman named Susan Carlion, whose son Adam was a great student, straight A student, went to Kent State from Stowe, and one night he made a colossal mistake, but it was just one mistake. He went next door and tried heroin, and from that moment on, it was a battle to keep him off of it. And the family thought he had beaten it. They went on a great vacation. He came home and he relapsed, and instead of getting heroin, he got carfentanil, which is an elephant tranquilizer. That's the rat poison in my metaphor. And I want to put that person away for as long as we can.
Gentlemen. We live on the edge of...
Is the light on the bottom?
No. Nope.
Testing.
Okay, I've gotten my instructions now on the use of the lavalier. We live on the edge of one of the greatest economic and natural resources in the world, the Great Lakes. They have been under assault. In fact, the city of Toledo lost its water supply a couple of years ago for almost a month. What do you see as the state's role in protecting and preserving this natural and economic resource? We know that the federal government has some plans and is doing some work. What is the role of the state, and what would you envision doing as a representative in that effort?
Thank you, Mayor. I am a Republican. I am conservative in many ways, but I'm also, I care deeply about the environment. And the reason is, government is the only one who can really do anything about the environment. Private industry doesn't have an incentive to do it. And the Great Lakes are the greatest asset we have as a state from a drinking water perspective, and sometimes from a recreational perspective. As far as the toxic algal blooms, we absolutely have to address the runoff problems. The geological data is out there. We know what's causing it. To a certain extent, it's runoff from farms. To a certain extent, it's runoff from other areas. And we have to insist that people take this seriously, so that we have the drinking water for the next generation.
Thanks, Mayor. I would say that the way that we have tried to get at this problem, specifically to the algal bloom in the Great Lakes, is through voluntary measures, and that's not working. And it is far too great a resource, both in terms of the basics, healthy drinking water, access to water, but the economic impact, massive multi-billion-dollar economic impact, as you alluded to, for our state, for us to not take this very seriously. So I said this to the Farm Bureau and did not win their endorsement because of it, but I am a proponent of Governor Kasich's more essentially mandatory regulations that we need to put in place to protect that source of water. Now, the state absolutely needs to partner and help the landowners there. The burden should not be solely on them to mitigate runoff in the surrounding communities. It's not just farms, for runoff. The state needs to provide that help, and it is something worth investing in, and it is something worth dedicating funding to because of the massive return on investment that it brings to the local communities and really to the state and the entire region. So I would be a proponent of, and actually Governor Kasich has released some mandatory or some stricter regulations. I think they're up for debate in the State House. I would be supportive of those to take a stronger stand for protection, with a combination of state grants and programs that can help the landowners and the cities in the surrounding area solve that problem. It has to be a partnership.
Well, I have a question. Oh, okay, go ahead.
I'm going to ratchet it up another scale. I'm an environmental scientist, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through reading the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report that came out this week. We have maybe 30 years. Maybe we have less time than that because we have failed to bite the bullet that the second largest creator of greenhouse gases on the planet, in the U.S. We have a government that denies science and climate change. Ohio is in the catbird seat in many instances in terms of how it could lead. And what I would like to know is what kind of policy initiatives, changes, leadership, modeling will you support in the Ohio legislature to help Ohio begin to acknowledge the reality that fossil fuels are not designed to support life on the planet in the future?
Thank you for that question. I can tell you it may be somewhat controversial in certain groups to talk about climate change, but I've talked to a lot of kids, young voters in this campaign, and it is one of the first things they bring up to me every time, and it is on top of their mind and something they're very concerned about. So 2 specific policy initiatives. One I like to talk about is in wind power. In this state, we don't see almost any utility scale wind. That's because wind setback rules that were designed by the fossil fuel industry and that were carried into the State House by the folks that they give a lot of money to passed in this state. What those do, those setback laws squeeze the area where you could essentially do wind power in the state quite effectively to make sure that it couldn't get to utility scale. But it's a good story. It's not a story of sacrifice. It's a story of economic opportunity. I have a fellow Air Force Academy grad who's the CEO of a wind power company in Virginia called Apex Wind, who told me, Casey, I have $2 billion with a B of investment ready to go in Ohio if you could standardize your laws with Michigan. Michigan. Okay, we can get that right. Wind power comes with revenues for local governments, for schools in areas of the state and rural areas where it's needed the most. It comes with direct jobs. The fastest growing job in America is wind turbine technician. Companies, 85% of S&P 500 companies, I know because I looked this up for our council meeting last night, have sustainability requirements for where they are going to locate their operations. We recently lost a Facebook data center to Fort Worth, Texas, because we didn't have wind resources in the state. And clean air, a fundamental thing that we can provide, and clean energy. So specific policy initiative, wind setback rule reduction to standardize us and give Ohio businesses and workers a fighting chance to win an opportunity to get a foothold in that massively growing industry. And then the second policy initiative is our renewable energy standard. We're the only state in the nation that stopped or froze a renewable energy standard. I'd like to see it continued.
Thank you for that question. You said we have 30 years. Can you 30 years for what?
Before life on the planet becomes extremely difficult.
Well, I think that's preposterous. I do believe that there is climate change, and I believe that it is coming. But there's people who are ringing the alarm bells who don't need to be. Let's deal in truth and honesty. We need to understand that the planet's getting warmer, and it's probable that humans are a cause of it. And we need to deal with things in the factual realm, not in, life's going extinct or going to become difficult in 30 years. What I'll tell you is that I have been an advocate and will be an advocate for an all-of-the-above approach to energy. That means nuclear, wind, solar, and fossil fuels, because if we go too quickly to a world without fossil fuels, you realize that we're all going to pay for it. And there's a lot of people who can't afford to pay for it, and we have to be sympathetic to their plight. So I think the most pressing thing that you'll see in the state legislature is the threat of losing nuclear plants in Ohio. And if you lose nuclear, you have a stronger reliance on natural gas, because renewables at this stage cannot pull their own weight. Hopefully they can. Hopefully that, I think Casey and I both have a vision for where they can in the future, but it's just not feasible in the short run.
Okay, I have a question, obviously. One of my main concerns is education. So in the state, there was a complaint about how the governor and the state legislature don't always get together to get things passed, but they were incredibly effective in passing legislation about, I think, 10, 12 years ago for charter schools. Encouraged for-profit charter schools, very little regulation to allow them to operate however they will. And we've invested about, this is true, $1 billion a year in charter schools. And a lot of that money is coming out of our inner city schools. Now, there are some very good charter schools, but my question to you, what we've seen though, is that there's charter schools where one had 10,000 kids at $6,000 a year each, $60 million, where they didn't even attend. And so I've heard that school choice is the key issue there, and that parents would never make a bad choice for their kids, and that we should fund that school choice. But I've got to ask you, one, do you feel that that's been a good investment? Would you continue it? And finally, would you, for each of you, accept donations from the for-profit charter school companies?
First. I'll take those in reverse order because I'm trying to remember the specific questions. I've not taken money from charter school companies. I haven't sought it. It's something I've not thought of. I don't make it a practice or just reject people who want to support me out of hand, because I think a lot of some of the charter schools are doing a great job, as you alluded to. There's one in Cleveland called the Breakthrough Schools that really are bringing kids out of generational poverty, and that's one of my main objectives. So let me start with what I would like to say positive about charter schools is that I believe there are districts in Ohio where parents don't have a choice for quality schools, and they need one. I think it's a fundamental right. But bringing the profit motive into it does distort things. And I am absolutely adamant about removing this concept where if you give money to a charter, it has to come from the school where the child left. Because I don't know if you understand this, but $6,000 will go from that district to the charter, but the state didn't necessarily give that district $6,000 in the first place. In the instance of, say, Twinsburg gets 27% of that $6,000. So you're worse off than if that kid never enrolled in the first place, which is wrong. It needs to be changed. If we want to fund certain charters in certain failing districts, I think that makes sense, but it has to be, we have to hold the local districts harmless from that. Now, whether this should be a for-profit or a non-for-profit venture, I think there's a good argument that our schooling should not be, there shouldn't be a profit incentive there.
Thanks, James, for the question. I think let's get at the fundamental issue first, which is that we need strong public schools in this state. So we have a thrice ruled unconstitutional funding formula in the state that basically our schools rely too much on property taxes from the local district for their funding. What that creates is a situation where kids' educational and economic and opportunity outcomes are too heavily reliant on the zip code that they're born in. And I think that's fundamentally unfair. We need to fix our funding formula. I plan to try to blow it up and start from scratch, look at states that haven't gone from 8th in education in 2010 to 22nd, where we're at today, just in 8 years. And look at states where it's working, where funding is more equitable, perhaps based on the population, perhaps distributed at the county level, like in Pennsylvania, perhaps as a portion of sales tax as opposed to property tax. Right now we have a tax transfer to local districts that are having to go back again and again for levies, not just for new buildings, but for operational and core programming, things like that will really cut into educational outcomes. With regard to for-profit charters, I can't see a role for them in the state going forward. And with regard to your question, no, I wouldn't accept money from any for-profit charter school, because I've seen over the last 8 years, I've observed what corrosive effect that has had in the state. I don't want to be part of that, where the money goes to the politicians who then stop regulating, and then we have a school overcharge us for $180 million. And then we have a heat wave and we have to cancel classes because we can't afford air conditioning on our schools. That would cost $100 million, according to a nonpartisan think tank in Columbus, to get air conditioning on all our schools. ECOT alone overcharged us $180 million that they can't account for. That is wrong. We're going in the wrong direction. So I cannot see a role for that, for a for-profit charter in the state going forward.
What are your views on Social Security and Medicare?
I'm a believer, strong proponent of the social safety net. I think those programs have been a huge part of what, like when we have an economic downturn, for example, when senior citizens are not in crisis because they have that safety net available to them, something that they've paid into for, and earned that right to get that entitlement. When it comes to I guess just the basics that government should provide. I think making sure that folks, after working for a full career, have some secure, safe source of revenue and access to health care. I think that is a moral and economic imperative. I would say going forward, just actuarially, and kind of unfortunately for our generation, there are some adjustments that we will have to make to Social Security and to Medicare to ensure that they remain viable. And this isn't so much a state level issue, but I could say I understand the data and I understand the reality there that there will probably have to be some adjustments, whether it's in at the point at which you get benefits, whether that's indexed to life expectancy or whether they change the increase over time. I wouldn't be supportive of doing that for today's recipients, but in the future, I think that's something that will have to happen to keep those programs viable.
Thank you for your question. I basically say the same thing Casey said on every point. This isn't a state issue so much. It's a federal issue, but we definitely, Medicare is going nowhere, first of all. Social Security, if we do nothing, will go away. So we have to strengthen it. We have to make sure the actuary tables make sense. And I've always said that my generation needs, I'd say people who are in their 30s and 40s need to know now that their Social Security recipient, benefit recipient date is going to change. Because that's the only way to make this thing solvent, or find another funding source for it. But I'll tell you, if you want to get inside the brain of a 33-year-old like me, we don't think that money's going to be there for us. But we definitely have to protect it for people who have planned their whole life and put money into it their whole lives.
So I have a question. Both of you have young families, and I'm just curious how you balance your campaigning and your families, and talk to us a little bit about that dynamic. And also, 10 years from now, where do you see yourselves in terms of political office, and what are some of your long-term goals?
Thanks, Evan. Somebody asked me the other day, somebody asked me a similar question. They say, well, Mike, I'd really like to see you in Washington and bust people up in Washington. I said, there's not a chance. And the reason is not because I wouldn't want to tackle the challenge. It's because I have a 15-month-old daughter. And to miss her for 3 days in a row in Washington is unfathomable. And so through this campaign, it's taught me that there's a lot of things that are fickle in the world. I've had my reputation attacked in ways that I thought, my integrity was the strongest part about me, and it's being attacked. It's hard to imagine that kind of thing going away and part of you just being chipped away, but that's what we signed up for. But what that's taught me is that the family and your faith are things that cannot be touched, and those are things you need to cherish more than anything. As far as where I'll be in 10 years, Lord willing, if I'm successful as a state representative and I get things done, then I won't take things off the table. But if I get down there and I'm just another guy, I'm out. It's too big of a sacrifice for my family to be a state representative. I'll come back home, and if I'm not being effective, I'm not going to just fill a seat. I'll come back home and have more time with my family, less stress, and make more money. I'm not going to be just another guy.
Thanks for that question. This Mike can relate, I'm sure. This is just a very stressful, difficult thing to go through, and we've been at it since at least January. So we're in the home stretch. And I'm proud to say it's been, there's still some time for it to all blow up, but it's been pretty positive, which has been nice. I would say I'm truly thankful. My wife is in her final year of her tenure review, which comes with extraordinary demands at the University of Akron. She has to publish constantly, bring in money, bring in research, and publish research, get grants, and she's like holding it together for us. I'm so thankful with all of her job and all the commitments that she has, that she's like, I guess, my rock, really, as I have counsel and I have to travel for work. I support the DoD, so I am all over the country from Hawaii to Boston in a given week. And then I have to campaign too, or I get to campaign, I should say. So that family aspect is so important. And As I've been on the campaign trail, you see the congressional candidates and you see even the statewide candidates and the sacrifice they make, and I appreciate it, but it is absolutely beyond, I agree with Mike here, beyond comprehension for me to be that I could be away from my family for that long. I truly want to. There's 3 specific priorities that I want to get solved at the State House for us. If my political career ends in 2 years or 4 years or 8 years, whatever it is, and I've gotten some of those things done, I'll consider that job accomplished, mission accomplished. And I would say I have a terrific silver lining if I don't win this election, and that's that I get to continue serving with Bill and Dan and the mayor and Hal and everybody on City Council, because I love that job, I really do. And I love being able to make an impact at the local level, and that keeps me right, here in Hudson, which is a city that I love. So I kind of view it under that guise.
Being part of the Interact Club, we try our best to support the people in our community and try and support the less fortunate around us. How would you supply and sort of support the less fortunate, not only in our community, but in the surrounding communities and in the state as a whole?
Yeah, great question. There's a few ways to do that. It comes back to when I talk about my campaign and what I want to do, our campaign, it comes back to the basics for me. So these 3 specific things are strong communities that we owe it to our kids and those who are less fortunate, through local government funds, through partnerships with nonprofit organizations and different stakeholder groups, and the county level and the state level and the federal level to bring strong, funding and opportunities into where we live. The specific policy initiative, again, that I want to see restored is local government funds to build the strength in communities that we need to attract families and to retain families and to grow the region. From an education perspective, I think that's maybe the most important thing we can do for kids is get education right. So in addition to the fixing the funding formula, ending the era of unregulated charter schools, I would love to see a down payment in the state on universal pre-K. My wife studies this at Akron. For every $1 that you invest in early childhood education, $7 are returned to the taxpayer, because that child has greater economic potential, or they're able to achieve a greater potential because they come into kindergarten at a more level footing. The data shows when kids are entering a classroom environment for the first time at a young age, they never catch up with the kids who've had the opportunity for early childhood education. So I think that is a smart investment that the state can make, that other states around the country are. And then it comes back down to the fundamentals of clean water, clean air. And we've talked about a couple of those things here today, but that is something I am strongly committed to, and it hits quite close to home for me, for my own child. So I think getting the basics right, strong communities, strong education, clean and healthy environment is where we can start.
Thank you for that question. I'll tell you first what I do in my personal life, because I have a heart for people in poverty. I've been a mentor in the Big Brothers program for 4 years, and that's given me a real window inside what it's like to be born in the batter's box instead of being born on second or third base like I was. And to understand what my little brother goes through and what his siblings go through has taught me how I can be a better legislator. And the primary way I can do that is, well, let me tell you what's been done first. I see this as Republicans and Democrats both failed on the issue of poverty. Republicans often say, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. I'm not going to pay for you to be lazy. That's what you hear sometimes. Democrats often, want to have a great social net that turns into a comfort net that traps people, that people don't ever have an incentive to go make more money because then they'll lose government benefits. I want to do something completely opposite. I want to get into these communities and say, we have opportunities for you to go make good middle-class salaries as a welder, as a carpenter, as a computer coder, and we're going to get you into these schools and connect you with these opportunities to break the chains of generational poverty. We're going to reinstitute apprenticeship programs in the state of Ohio. so that kids can go and develop a skill and not have $100,000 of debt, but yet maybe make $60,000, $70,000 as someone in their early 20s. All of a sudden, you see families you see young people from impoverished areas that are able to buy a house. You're going to see more two-parent households, and you're going to see a lot of neighborhoods transformed. That's my vision for the state of Ohio, and if I can get people on board with that, you're going to see a much different Ohio in 10 years than you see today.
So I'm going to throw one more education question in. Also, the apprenticeship is a great idea. We actually have an apprenticeship program right now that's been started. So I'd love to see that continue. Another area that a lot of people express concern to school boards is safety in the schools. You know, in Hudson, we've taken a whole series of different measures to ensure safety. One of the things, though, that the state school board and the state legislature has been strong in recommending to us is to arm our teachers with weapons in the school. Now, I don't know if you want Ed Sogan to have an AK-47, but my question is this something that you would encourage and try and legislate that the boards would have to allow teachers to bring loaded guns to the school? And you could probably get my opinion on it from the way I'm asking.
So I'm actually thrilled that you asked this, because I've been hearing rumors from people who come up to me and say, Mike, is it true you want to arm teachers? And that's what you deal with in politics, is people make stuff up about you and assign opinions to you that have nothing, that you've never said, that you don't believe in one bit, and that's one of them. I don't believe we should be arming teachers. That's preposterous, to use that word again. We need to spend every dime we can to ensure we have a school that is every bit as protected as Progressive Field or Cleveland Browns Stadium, where you have to go through, where it's a secure building. You just can't get in with a weapon. And it's sad that our community has come to this, and I guess we could stick our heads in the sand and say, well, I wish we could just go back or take everybody's guns away so that this isn't a problem, but those aren't realistic proposals. We really have to protect our kids, and there's no expense that I would not incur to make sure that we have absolute protection for these young people who are our future. And just to be 100% clear on camera, I don't want to arm the teachers.
I agree. It's insanity to try to introduce more folks trying to identify shooters in it. And it adds to the chaos. It adds to the risk of injury and death in a situation like that. This hit really close to home for me with my daughter Nora, who has just entered the Hudson schools. But I'll never forget her first day of daycare at her preschool here in Hudson, where they told us about the lockdown drills they have to do. And I guess I'm lucky enough to be of that last sort of part of our generation that didn't have to live with this fear, because I was a junior, senior in high school when the Columbine shooting happened, and this sort of era of school shootings became a national disgrace. But I would like to live in a state where we don't have to harden our schools, with, insane security measures. I would like to get at the root of the problem, which is sensible gun restrictions. I qualified on the M16. I qualified in the M9 many times in the Air Force, especially the M16, which has the civilian equivalent of the AR-15. That is a weapon that is designed to kill as many people as possible, as fast as possible. When it comes to assault rifles, I'm not a supporter of folks having access to those. I look at the Second Amendment, I read it, and it says a well-regulated militia. I don't think we're doing a good job of regulating things when kids have to go to school concerned almost every day that a school shooting could happen. And this is another one of those issues that doesn't come up as often in certain groups, and then with kids it's the first thing on their mind, and that's just sad. So minimum age requirements, taking a hard look at assault weapons as to whether or not we want to continue allowing access for those because of the damage they've caused, and better regulation of peer-to-peer transactions, which is the weak point in gun transactions today, would be the ways I'd want to strengthen.
What advice do you have for teens and young adults who are interested in going into politics? And also, what do you find to be the hardest part about being a politician?
I would say folks maybe don't think about this, understandably so, but on a daily basis, you interact with the government almost the entire day. And what I'd say is local government is about 90% of that. Your roads, your schools, the first responders in your community, almost everything that you see or touch at the local level is, local government has had some impact on that, at some level. And you have the ability, absolute ability, to have a major impact on the direction that your community goes in. I have been immensely happy with the impact that I've been able to have. That I feel the initiatives that I've been able to support and carry forward on City Council going forward. So I'd say continue, because there's a lot of cynicism about getting into politics and getting into government, but it is a tremendous way. Tremendous opportunity for you to go in and make a positive difference and make a real impact on your community. I'd say the most difficult part is communities need to adapt, just as James Ellsworth knew in Hudson. We have to continue adapting. We love Hudson today. I love this region today, but we have to make the investments and and that's tough. When it becomes real for people and the big changes are coming, it's tough to push those through, understandably so, because we should involve different stakeholders and we should involve every group we can, and everybody in a democracy should have a say. But I'd say it does get, it's hard to do the big things. Rightfully so, but it takes a lot of persistence, a lot of cooperation, a lot of compromise, a lot of negotiation to follow up with what Mike was saying to make it happen. So if you're going to do it, just be ready to have to stick with it, keep that commitment going, and make that change.
That was a good answer. To piggyback, I would say, looking at politics from the outside, you see the yard signs and you see the advertisements and you think, well, that's pretty cool. They're getting a lot of glory and all this. But if that's what drives you, stay as far away from politics as you can. Because, first of all, I'm not singling you out, anybody, because we don't need people like that. But more importantly, for the person who's examining it, it's fleeting. And if you're not out to help people or don't have a passion of your own, and I think you've heard both of us speak about our passions, and I think they're both very credible passions. The first time that somebody punches you in the face, you're going to want to run home, and you're going to get punched in the face on a weekly basis. I've been socked in the face a lot of times, and I keep fighting because I believe that the juice is worth the squeeze, and that the passions that burn deep inside of me, I'm going to do something about them, and there's no one person or group of people that can stop me because I really believe in it. And so find that kernel or that morsel of an issue inside you and grow it and start to understand something, whether it's education or whether it's gun safety or whatever it happens to be. And if you really believe in it and you find an opportunity, go out and serve. I did it as a 24-year-old when people laughed at me. How much time do I have? I have a quick story. Okay, so I went in, and when I decided to run as a 24-year-old, I went into a trusted law professor's office, and I said, Professor, I want to run. He says, okay, who are you running against? I name person A, person B, person C. He's like, well, you can't beat person A. You're definitely not beating person B, and person C is going to wipe the floor with you. Don't waste your time. Don't listen to people like that. I didn't. I had that professor that fall, and the day after Election Day, I got up and told that story in his classroom. It was the finest hour of my life. Thank you, everybody.
Not literally punched in the face. I just want to clarify that. At least not yet. Okay.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Casey. Great job today. Thank you, Mayor Basil, for coordinating this great presentation. Thanks so much for our guests being here today. Alex, I forgot to mention you. Thanks for being here. And to all of our Interact students, great questions. That's awesome. We look forward to seeing you again soon.